one.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Doctor. Tonight we have a very special edition, Miracle Health Habits. And here to help us along with that, we have Xaye Faith and Devann Edwards. Take it away, my friends.
Well, thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carol. For anyone that's on this call, this is a very special call, and this is a call that we partner with Dr. Bob to really share with the audience, and it's about Miracle Health Habits. And Miracle Health Habits relates to a summit that Xaye Faith and I have been covering for the past 21 days between September the 22nd through to October the 12th. And we have this very special guest. That is not, it's not only special because we're talking about Miracle Health Habits, it's special because we have one of the best, the heart-centered leader that I haven't found a comparison. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I haven't found a comparison to like the really what embodies heart-centered excellence, and especially in the health field, a fountain of wealth in terms of when it comes to health. And this is who we're talking about is Dr. Bob, and Dr. Bob will share his secret miracle health habits and what he recommends to you and his patients. Let me tell you a bit about Dr. Bob. Dr. Robert A. Rakowski is a chiropractor, board certified kinesiologist, certified clinical nutritionist, certified biological terrain instructor, and the clinical director of the Natural Medicine Center in Houston, Texas. In addition to running a busy practice, Dr. Rakowski has lectured internationally, for over 30 years on various topics related to natural and lifestyle medicine, happiness, and success. He has appeared on numerous television programs and international radio talk shows. He is a recognized expert. So he's the doctor to the doctors, guys. He's a recognized expert in functional endocrinology and in-office diagnostic procedures to assess nutritional status. His clinical experiences ranges from treating elite professional athletes to critically ill patients with a variety of cancers and autoimmune diseases. And again, as I said before, Dr. Bob Rakowski is one of those experts who's really going to reveal some secrets to where we can upgrade our rituals and really live a life of longevity, and really find out what it means to adopt a miracle health habit. So, Dr. Bob, if you want to take it away, thank you. We appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm super proud of you and Xaye, and as my mentors say, you should be proud of yourself as well for creating this great summit and making the world healthier. In my 31 years, I've had a lot of wonderful experiences. I've had the whole spectrum from elite professional athletes to people critically ill, people that medicine gave up on, sent home to die. I'm happy to say that many of these people are alive even decades later. And I love the topic that you created for your summit, the miracle health habits, the 8 pillars of health. And we're going to talk about all those things and leave time for questions and answers at the end. And then we're going to talk about an easy and delicious path to better health, which, of course, if we ask people, if you prefer it easy or difficult, I think people are going to take it easy. And how about delicious? Everybody loves that. So number one mini miracle habit is actually going to be self-care. And I'm a good student of life and have many mentors. And someone who's pretty popular now is Dr. Jordan Peterson, professor of clinical psychology, wrote a very popular book, 12 Rules for Life. Rule number 2, maybe this could be number 1, treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Now, wouldn't it be awesome if we all took that on as a rule for living? If we actually paid attention to everything that we did and said and how we moved and how we lived and how we interacted with the world, I think that would be a great formula for health, success, and happiness. But I'm going to tell an interesting story about this author. This is Tom Rath. Now, the first book that he wrote, best-selling book, was called Eat, Move, Sleep. And this is certainly going to be 3 of those self-help care habits. And later on, we'll get into physical health. But you'd never know to look at him. In this picture, he's 45 years old, but he was never supposed to live past his 31st birthday. He lost an eyeball to cancer when he was 15 years old. And when they did a scan, they said, you know what, you lost the genetic lottery. You have tumors all over your body. So he had tumors in his spine, in his liver, in his kidneys, in his pancreas, in his spleen, in his lungs, in his adrenal glands. And they said, you know what, you're going to have a pretty miserable existence and a short life. They said, don't ever think about getting married, having kids, because there'd be a chance you give them this issue as well. And you know what? Tom Rath decided there's got to be something I can do. His grandfather actually was the founder of the Gallup Poll Organization, so a very smart family. And he started researching. He said, all right, if medicine doesn't have anything to offer me, what if I took better care of myself? And he figured out if he ate right for him, his tumors would shrink. If he moved, not too much, not too little, but the right amount, his tumors would shrink. If he made sure that he got plenty of really good sleep every night, his tumors would shrink. Anytime he fell back on any of these things, his tumors would actually grow. So I've taught nutrition all over the world, and this is a very solid summary of dietary guidelines. I tell people that, Hippocrates said many, many years ago, let thy food be thy medicine, but he was talking about a different type of food back then. So here's what I tell people: eat real food, clean food, not too much, not too often, every color, every day, in a way that honors your physiology, your genetics, and your body goals, mostly plants. What do I mean by real food? Well, not the food-like substances, the chemicals that you find in packages in the grocery store, and certainly not things that are genetically modified. When we talk about clean food, how about no herbicides, insecticides, fungicides? What about not too much? The number one mechanism of longevity ever studied is actually calorie restriction. Not too often. Intermittent fasting is something that's very popular now, and for good reason. There's over 100,000 studies on how when we have longer windows away from food, our body does better. Why every color? Because every color has different nutrients. And then every single day, why not nourish ourselves every day in a way that honors our physiology, our genetics, and our body goals? And why mostly plants? Because plants are clean, healthy, nourishing, alkalizing, and wonderful for us. So very powerful quote from Jack LaLanne: if God made it, it's okay. If man made it, throw it away. People that don't understand intermittent fasting, let's just make it simple. When you wake up in the morning, wait a little longer till you start eating, and then quit eating a little earlier before you go to bed every single night. And I tell people, if you just added 1 minute a day on the front end and 1 minute a day on the back end, understand you would increase your fasting window an hour the first month, an hour the second month, another hour the third month, another hour the fourth month. 6 months in, if you're getting 8 hours sleep a night, that's a 14-hour fasting window, which is pretty sufficient for most people. By the way, later we're going to talk about these amazing turbocharged products, but the whole time that you're fasting, you can have coffee, you can have tea, and these are some of the best in the absolute game of coffee and tea. I taught a weight management series around the world in about 2005, and most of the world has heard this phrase, little old lady and little old man. But I asked the question, why don't we hear the phrase big old lady, big old man? And the fact is simple: big people don't get to be old, or if they do, they spend their final decade with a major medical disability. So if you're going to eat too much, that is going to be the fast path to the grave. And there's a quote over 100 years old that says, most people are digging their grave with their teeth. When we talk about moving right, understand that life is motion. If we move better, we will live better. And not moving, maybe one of the biggest killers out there right now. And there's a phrase that's, gaining a lot of science behind it. They're calling sitting the new smoking. So less time not moving is not good. We want to move every joint, every day, every range of motion, pain-free, and grow from there. And that's a formula for having a body that works right for your entire life. I like to biohack certain things and figure out the fast track to success. And there's a fitness test that they've used for professional athletes called the Wingate cycle test. And they would have athletes get on a bike, they would warm up for about 2 minutes, and then 30 seconds, they were required to pedal absolutely all out and see how much power they could generate over that period of time. Well, there's a reporter that looked at that and thought, my gosh, that looks like an entire workout by itself. I wonder if that's the only thing I did for the next 30 days. So she assessed her body composition, her aerobic status, her anaerobic status, her muscle strength, everything else. And the only exercise she did for 30 days was this all-out challenge. Well, at the end of 30 days, every single parameter got better. So can you get a good workout in 2 minutes of warm-up and 30 seconds a day? Absolutely, you can. So I think we all can make time for that. And when it comes to sleep right, I tell people that a great day starts the night before. And this was one of the best researchers on human performance ever, the scientist Anders Ericsson. This book is called Peak, and he studied the best of the best in every field, whether it was art, music, entertainment, fitness, professional athletics, business, whatever. The best of the best slept an average of 8.6 hours a night. And I tell people, if you use your brain and body more during the day, and we want to do that, then you need to rest both of them more at night. Later on, when we talk about probably the most powerful biohack that I know for health, the herb Ganoderma lucidum is in some amazing coffee and tea and hot cocoa products. But Ganoderma is proven to help people fall asleep faster, sleep deeper longer, and wake up more refreshed. So the second pillar of health is going to be environment. There's a wonderful TED Talk by a Tony Robbins spinoff by the name of Peter Sage. And he talks about, in the long run, environment will always trump willpower. And so he uses the analogy, let's say that you wanted to keep yourself warm and you were committed to doing that. He says, if you're living in a freezer, it doesn't matter how many layers of clothing you put on, how much you move your body, eventually you're going to get cold or even freeze. So you want to create a healthy, nourishing, happy, productive, successful environment. And our environment has become progressively intoxicated over about the last 80 years. So how big is the problem? Well, they've done studies. There are over 80,000 registered toxic chemicals in the environment. And when they study them for toxicity, they study them one at a time, not in combinations of 2 or 3. So by the way, think about it. We have 26 letters of the alphabet, and think about how much we can do with that. What if we add 80,000 letters? So there's something called the Human Toxin Inventory. They've been assessing fat samples from cadavers and surgical patients for now over 50 years. And the reason they look at fat is because most of these toxins are fat soluble. And they've come to realize that every man, woman, and child walking around has over 700 toxins in their body at any one period in time. A study on umbilical cord blood before babies were ever born, all the infants that they looked at were exposed to more than 200 toxins ever before they took their very first breath. So this is a quote that or a citation that I've used for years as I've taught seminars and shared with patients. But the symptoms of chronic poisoning include fatigue, sleep disturbance, intestinal distress, allergy symptoms, headaches, confusion, and anxiety. And I tell people, if we got rid of these symptoms, I'd probably have to do something else for a living, because this is what most people come into my office complaining of. If we were to look at blood flow at rest as opposed to under physical exercise, we see that actually the liver gets the highest amount of blood flow, followed by the kidney, followed by the brain. And very, very simply, what this means is our body's highest priority at rest is cleaning toxins from our system. So I always tell people, if that's our body's highest priority, maybe that should be our lifestyle and our habits' highest priority. When we look at detoxification, some people, they think they can get it done with a juice fast or a water fast, but we know that detoxification is nutrient dependent, energy dependent, and protein dependent. And if we don't get enough of all of those things, we don't have what we need to clear these toxins from our bodies. And I tell people, sometimes people attempt a little bit of a detox, but if you have a vehicle that's stuck in the mud, and someone comes by and gives you a little push and you hit the gas, you often dig a deeper rut for yourself, because you can start releasing toxins, not be able to neutralize them, and you might feel worse than you started and think that detoxification doesn't work. So one thing that I tell people is that bodies respond to frequency, duration, intensity, quality, and timing of stimuli. And when I have people do 2 weeks of intense detox every single year, usually a week at the beginning of January, and they can extend it to 10 days, and a week at the beginning in the summer, where they use specialized detoxification nutrients and all organic vegetables. And I'll tell you what, some people find it absolutely life-saving. I had a patient in this morning. I put him on a detox 2 years ago. And you know what? He felt so good since then. He had an injury. So he came in today. He says, Dr. Bob, you probably don't recognize me. I said, I don't. He says, the reason you don't recognize me is I lost 90 pounds. You gave me that detox. It changed my life. It made me realize that, oh my gosh, I can feel so much better than I did. I took advantage of healthy habits from here forward, and I'm a completely different person. So you never know how just a nudge in the right direction can help people tremendously. Now we're going to talk about mental health and mental health habits. And Daniel Amen is a board-certified psychiatrist and one of the most brilliant brain researchers on the game. He's a best-selling author. And this book is entitled The End of Mental Illness. And he asks a very significant question. What if mental health was brain health? Well, reality is they're not exactly the same, but they are very, very tightly related. So he did a TED Talk a number of years ago, and the title of it was What I Learned After 83,000 Brain Scans. And by the way, now he's done over 200,000 brain scans, but quite simply what he found is that we can change our brains. People can change their brains, both the structure of the brain, the function, and the hard wiring of the brain. And so when you look at these actual brain scans, you look at a healthy brain and you see that that looks very, very different from a brain that's overweight and someone that has sleep apnea. And by the way, being overweight and having sleep apnea go together. And then look a further degradation there as far as Alzheimer's is concerned. What I tell people, here in the US, the number one fear of people before the age of 55 is actually cancer. After the age of 55, people are afraid of outliving their brain. And we see a lot of people that start having cognitive decline in their early 50s. Fascinating study. Here, they had the same person, the same brain, at one point get into a state of gratitude and scan the brain, and another, think of something that they were absolutely hateful towards. And very, very simply, when you have hateful thoughts, it's not good for your brain, your body, your spirit. And I'll even say that not good for our world either. I've taught people for years that the brain is the most nutrient dependent, energy dependent, stress vulnerable, and toxin vulnerable system in the body. And if we address each of these categories, brains and moods can get much, much, much better. So if anybody saw the movie Concussion, Mike Webster was the central feature there in that movie. He played 18 professional NFL seasons with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He won 4 Super Bowls, but when he died, he didn't even know his name, his wife's names, his kid's name. He was actually homeless under a bridge. This was his character in the movie. And when they did a scan of his brain and a biopsy and autopsy of his brain, what they found out was they had to create a new medical diagnosis, advanced chronic traumatic encephalopathy. He had so many concussions that the scar tissue of his brain actually started to squeeze and compress the life and function out of the brain. So this was a rat study, and I like to preface this by telling people I'm never in favor of putting any living creature through any type of grief, but they gave these rats a concussion, a controlled concussion. One group got no treatment whatsoever. The other group got nutrients, including Ganoderma lucidum, which I'll talk about more later. And this was the autopsies of the brain 21 days later. And if you look at the amount of scar tissue, also known as amyloid plaque, which, by the way, is associated with Alzheimer's, probably at least a 95% reduction in 25 days. Very, very powerful there. Fun story here. This woman, Donna Mae, she is in a wheelchair because she was a diabetic and she had lost a limb to diabetes. I was giving a health talk and her daughter's friend happened to be there. And she said, my friend's mother is in assisted living. she's at risk of losing her leg. Do you think you could be of assistance? And I always answer that the same. I don't know, but I'll try. And I was sharing in that health talk, this case study, this foot was scheduled to be amputated. And you look at the difference 2 weeks and ultimately 17 months later. So we put Donna Mae on a very simple healthy habit program that we'll discuss later. And within a matter of days, her foot started healing. Ultimately, the gangrene completely resolved. And amazingly, at 3 months, both her diabetes and her dementia were in complete and total remission. So we never know what's possible until we try. When we start talking about a better brain, there's a brain tracking software called Neurotracker. It's been around for over 20 years, over 50 published medical studies, awesome in every demographic. And it's a great way to get a better brain. And it's been studied, as I like to say, in kids anywhere from 6 years old to 106 years old. So kids that have challenges concentrating in school, their brain can get better in just a matter of weeks of 6-minute sessions at a matter of 3 a week. That's proven in clinical studies. And we also have some treats, some Ganoderma infused hot chocolate. And this was a 6-year-old patient that was just having extreme challenges in school. And then notice how much better his brain was after 7 days of hot chocolates. So that herb Ganoderma, known to produce calming of the brain at the same level as a prescription dose of Valium, but without the miserable side effects. And other fun stories. I have a number of friends, but Sachin Patel was telling the story. A friend of his had a son with severe stuttering, where they had spent thousands of dollars and tried absolutely everything. And amazingly, they just switched him to a Ganoderma hot chocolate. And after 4 days, his stutter completely disappeared. Now, for most people, that would be hard to imagine that would be even possible. But the world's foremost authority in medicinal mushrooms is this gentleman here. His name is Paul Stamets. And you can look at his YouTube video and just type in Joe Rogan and Paul Stamets on mushrooms curing his stutter. He had a severe stutter. He was an absolute genius. But when he was in school as a teen, he couldn't even ask a question in class because he couldn't get the words out. He says he couldn't, go on a date because he just couldn't get the words out to tell anybody or start a conversation or ask for a date. But amazingly, just a single dose of medicinal mushrooms, stutter completely resolved. So you never know what's possible. And all the wonderful things that we can do for the brain. Great, Ganoderma is great for serotonin, GABA, acetylcholine, and dopamine. So that's happiness, calmness, memory, focus, and extreme joy. And even Parkinson's prevention. Next, we're going to talk about social health. And I really want to give a big shout out again to Xaye and Devann, because I don't think enough people talk enough about the importance of social health. But we've known probably since the beginning of time that man is a social animal. So Seneca was one of the original Stoic philosophers. And we realized that we're all better together. Charles Darwin is very famous for talking about survival of the fittest, but this part of his research is probably even more powerful and does not get enough attention. And here's what he said: in the long history of humankind and animal kind too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. So collaborating, forming teams, unions, groups, societies, this is what has helped man more than anything throughout human history. Simple quote here by this billionaire, Dan Pena. He says, "Show me your friends, I'll show you your future." So definitely our social circle. And then Steve Jobs, this was one of his final speeches, but very smart in what he said. If you hang out with 5 confident people, you'll be the 6th. If you hang out with 5 intelligent people, you'll be the 6th. If you hang out with 5 millionaires, you'll be the 6th. If you hang out with 5 idiots, you'll be the 6th. So choose your friends wisely, make really good social choices of people who want the best for you, the best for themselves, and the best for our world. When we start looking at physical health, one of my great mentors, Jim Rohn, he is, by the way, the individual that launched Tony Robbins. Very powerful quote. He says, take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live. And I want you to think about that. There's some scripture that says we should treat our bodies like a temple. And I agree, why wouldn't we want to take really good care of ourselves? And over time, those that do the best job of that often have the best rewards. So I've often talked about what I term the Magnificent Seven. You've got to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every single day. Eat right, we covered under a little bit in the self-care habit. Think right, we covered under mental health. Poop right, that's going to be detoxification. Sleep right, we talked under self-care. We even mentioned move right. So we got 5 of them. But what about drink right? The world is mostly water. Our body is mostly water. Most of the water should be inside of ourselves. So we want to consistently put in good, clean, alkaline, amazing water. But here's a fact. The world drinks coffee or tea. And if they use good coffee and tea, like the kind that I recommend, with every single sip, they can move every aspect of their life to better health. When we come to this talk right, what we know is that most relationships are going to be dependent, or really all relationships, on good communication. And every cell in your body, all of the 50 trillion cells, are potentially in communication with all of the other 50 trillion cells. So when you keep your body healthy, moving, active, nourished, well-rested, hydrated, these are all things that enhance cell-to-cell communication. When we start talking about emotional health and emotional management, I really like this statement. We basically want to learn how to respond in positive ways, regardless of how we feel. So, one of my great mentors is a gentleman named Dan Millman. He wrote a book called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. He was giving a lecture in a prison, and a prisoner came up to him and he said, "You know what? I've got problems with anger, And Dan said, "No, you don't." And the guy said, "I absolutely do." And Dan said, "No, you don't." And this guy started getting progressively mad, almost to the point where he wanted to hit Dan. He says, "Look, anger's not the problem. Anger's a natural emotion. Everybody is going to experience anger now and then. The question is, what do you do about it? And your problem is you're not controlling your behavior. So it's okay to get angry, but it's not okay to act out in a way that's harmful to other people. So, take a deep breath, or go for a jog, or get a hard workout, or whatever you need to do. But understand, we're all going to experience literally all of the emotions at some point or another. And that's not the issue. The issue is, how do we respond to those emotions? So I'll go back to Stoic wisdom thousands of years ago. It's not what happens, but how you react that makes all the difference in the world. And there's a term called equanimity, basically maintaining your balance, really in outlook and behavior. And I happen to think that this is the top way to promote emotional health. So you want to have that level of calmness and evenness of temper, no matter what's going on. And some of my mentors are used the analogy of a hurricane. If you're at the center, if you're at the eye, even though all this turbulence is going around, there's a lot of calmness where you have been. Aldous Huxley, a famous author, spent his entire life studying human health and psychology and behavior and everything else. And this is what he said on his deathbed, a very powerful quote. He says, "It's a bit embarrassing to have been concerned with the human problem all one's life, and to find at the end that one has no more to offer by way of advice than try to be a little bit kinder." Well, think about that for a moment, and what if you built on that? What if you were a little kinder to yourself, to those around you, and every day you started to get a little kinder just yet? And by the way, sometimes kindness is pointing out to someone, hey, listen, you're not doing the right thing for yourself or your family, right? So we might call that tough love. I'm going to call that a level of kindness as well. Next, we're going to talk about financial wellness and financial habits. Alan Greenspan, one of the leads of the Federal Trade Commission, basically, here's what he said: the number one problem in today's generation and economy is the lack of financial literacy. People just do not understand money. And so Robert Kiyosaki wrote a very famous book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he said, he had 2 dads. One was his biologic father. That happened to be his poor dad, who was a PhD and a university professor, and didn't have much financial success and really struggled with money throughout his life. That was his poor dad, but his rich dad, I don't believe even had a high school diploma, but yet he understood people and money and business. And he taught Robert Kiyosaki how to earn hundreds of millions of dollars. But in his cash flow quadrant, he says, you know what? It's okay to have a job, right? When you're an employee, you trade time for money. He says, and there's always a problem with that. No matter how much you get paid, you always run out of time. I personally know neurosurgeons that consistently work 60, 70 hours a week. And even though they make a very good living, they don't have a very good life, and they have a hard time cutting back because they leverage their income so much with so many goods and things that they purchased. Then there's the idea of being self-employed, and most people that are self-employed really don't have a business; they own a job. And what Robert Kiyosaki says, to be a business owner, you want to have 500 or more employees and essentially be able to walk away, where you can actually earn money, whether you're working the business or not. And then finally, the investor quadrant, that's where money works for you. So ultimately, we want to get to the right side of this equation. And fortunately, there's ways to do that. Warren Buffett, the most successful investor in history, says this: if you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you'll work until you die. And so most of us probably want to figure that part out. And finally, we're going to get to spiritual health. This is absolutely one of my favorite TED Talks of all time. Tom Chi is a brainiac astrophysicist. I believe he was at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, at age 15. So absolutely brilliant. And what he does is he talks about the origin, which was the Big Bang. But he says we're all connected. And I'm going to tell you three stories: a story of the heart, a story of the breath, and a story of the mind. And so he goes back to the Big Bang and he says, you know what? We only have all the atoms, and especially iron, from all of these supernovas, these amazing collisions between stars or even galaxies. And without those collisions, we don't have iron. And again, he traces that back. And these are pictures of galaxies that are literally hundreds of light years away, so farther away than we could ever imagine. And yet all of this stuff is happening, and it goes back, all of it, to the Big Bang. Then he says, for a story of the breath, let's go back about 3.5 billion years ago. At that point in time, there was not enough oxygen in the environment for the type of life that we know as today. Humans definitely could not exist in that atmosphere. But there was a tiny little bacteria, which they believe was a relative of cyanobacteria. And this bacteria would breathe in carbon dioxide, and it would actually exhale oxygen. And within that TED Talk, he tells an interesting story. He says, imagine you're one of these microscopic bacteria, and you have a very short lifespan, maybe just a few days. And you wonder, in this big world, how can I make a difference? Well, literally, these trillions of bacteria over the course of billions of years created the environment with the oxygen where we can live today. And without them, we would not have life as we know it. And then finally, a story of the mind. He says, you know what? Every single year, what he calls the palette of being expands. So keep in mind, he's an astrophysicist. That didn't exist, 150 years ago. And he used the analogy of a piano. He says, before 1709 was when that was invented, people didn't have an option to be a concert pianist. So ultimately, every time there's an advancement in the way that we do things around the world, there's different things that we can become. But again, ultimately, everything is connected, and it all goes back to that Big Bang. So, depending on what your thoughts are, if you believe in a God, well, what preceded the Big Bang? Well, the people that believe in a God say God existed before the Big Bang. Scientists, they say, I don't know, maybe there was nothing. How interesting, right? But amazing how all of life is organized. So now, how are we going to make these habits as healthy and as easy as we possibly can? And one thing that I teach doctors is that any program that we create is only as good as its compliance. And a very famous author, Dean Ornish, says sustainable changes must be pleasurable. So what if we could take something that people were doing every single day, like coffee or tea or hot chocolates or even super delicious shakes, and made them turbocharged by putting an herb in it known as Ganoderma lucidum? Well, the great news is that is what we have done. And Xaye and Devann and Carol and a number of us have actually partnered in a venture to make the world a whole lot better by sharing these products. And I'm happy to answer questions about that or anything else. So at this point, if there are any questions in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand or whatever you'd like to do, I'll be happy to address those.
Well, we already have a few questions in the chat, Dr. Bob.
Perfect.
The first one, where should someone start in resetting their health?
Well, that might be different, right? So when we look at these pillars of health, it's really good, one, to do a good assessment of where you are, and so ultimately, if I were to say what would be the biggest bang for the buck, it would start with self-care, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual self-care. And there's plenty of people that say, we're predominantly spiritual beings. We're spiritual beings in a physical body and hopefully an eternal spirit. So sometimes when people get a good handle on that, it starts moving them forward. But I often like to quote Og Mandino. He wrote a book years ago called The Greatest Salesman in the World. And there was a number of scrolls that he said were ancient scrolls that led people to health, success, and happiness. But one of the scrolls was described as love. And it starts out with this quote: "I will greet this day with love in my heart, for love is the greatest secret of success in all ventures. Muscle can split a shield and even destroy life, but only the unseen power of love can open the hearts of men. Until I master this art, I will remain no more than a peddler in the marketplace." And he goes on to say that he will love the sun and the stars and the moon and the earth and everybody on it. And here's the most powerful line. He says, "And most of all, I will love myself. For when I do, I will zealously inspect all things that I allow to enter my mind, my heart, my soul, and my body." So ultimately, I really think that love is the ultimate. And if we can master that self-love, and by the way, I think it's a lifetime effort to master that. It's really quite challenging, isn't it? Because we're imperfect beings. But if we can learn to love ourselves and zealously inspect all things, then we're off to a great start.
I admire how you remember all these quotes. Okay, next question. How would you advise someone who wants to stop using pharmaceutical products completely and take a more naturopathic route?
Well, there's a big challenge with a lot of pharmaceuticals for a lot of people, and sometimes they're easy to stop and other times not. And so case by case, you want to work with a professional. So I share this, I've taught seminars all over the world, and I had about 15 years ago, it was actually in Southern California, the nutrition company that was sponsoring my seminars decided to have a meet and greet with the doctor, the night before the major seminar. So we had a dinner and, I did a mini presentation, and the whole room was full of medical doctors. And I asked them, I said, I'm very thrilled to see you. And this is kind of unique. Why are you here? And one of them said, "We need to be here. Our patients don't want another pill. They actually want a real solution." Well, starting at that point forward, I started having more and more medical doctors in my audiences. And I ultimately learned, I asked the question, how many of you were taught to put people on medication? Well, every medical doctor's hand went up. Then I asked, how many of you were taught to take people off of medication? And we would need to have someone that was in practice for over 40 years to actually have been taught, unless there was a rare exception, to take people off of medication. So, you think about it, acid blockers, which are a very popular category of medication, those were originally studied to block acid for about a week to let an ulcer heal. But the average person taking acid blockers takes them for 20 years and then dies. I had an individual in today, he's on opioids. And I mean, those started killing more people than car accidents. The year was 2008 from overdose. And this guy said, I had pain, they gave me opioids, and I can't get off of them. I'm addicted. I have a horrible withdrawal. So he needs help getting off of these things. So my simple answer is congratulations on making that decision. Work with a professional And interestingly enough, there was a survey, it was a number of years ago. I don't know if it's still accurate, but at that time, the pharmacist was the most trusted healthcare provider. And so there's a lot of really smart pharmacists. If you get a pharmacist, they are brainiacs. They're really sharp. They put a lot of time in it. They understand the biochemistry, and they should be schooled in both putting people on and taking people off safely. So work with a professional on that.
Excellent. Next question. What do you recommend for someone who's dealing with anxiety and some depression?
Well, one, I don't want to say that misery loves comfort, but here's what we know is that probably the world stats on there are the highest they've ever been. You know, they believe that both of these have doubled over the last couple of years because of global policies. And that's horrible. You know, I was doing a daily update on the virus for about 100 days. And then one of my mentors reached out and said, Bob, you don't want to do that. There's stories that, you know, people in high places don't want told right now. So interestingly enough, I stopped sharing all of it, but one of my posts was on something called the Cobra effect. And if you go to my YouTube channel, you can see what the Cobra effect was. But what happened was there was a problem with cobras in India. So they created a bounty on cobras. If you brought in, and sorry, I don't like to kill anything, but if you brought in a dead cobra, they would pay you a bounty. Well, what clever people started doing was they got cobra farms and they started breeding cobras. So they would create thousands of them, kill thousands of them, bring them in, and they get these big bounties. And they said, well, okay, that backfired. We're not going to do that. Well, what they do, they let all the cobras out in the wild. So they made the problem much worse than it ever was. And so there was plenty of people at the start of these global policies that said, look, we don't want to make things worse than they already are. And so we want to be diligent about not taking away freedom, not making requirements on anybody in any way. But unfortunately, money won that out. So I would end all of those 100 days with crime, money, power, and drugs all go together. And that's a well-known quote that anybody can type in and notice they didn't say, you know, crime, money, power, and natural medicine. They didn't say, you know, goodness for humanity, money, power, and drugs, right? I mean, those four, that deadly quartet has been well documented throughout human history. So, you know, the sad reality is that a lot of people are dealing with this, but I'm going to go back to now more practical. The brain is the most nutrient dependent, energy dependent, stress vulnerable, toxin vulnerable. My YouTube channel is Dr._Bob_Rakowski. And you can type in depression and anxiety and other things and find it. Interestingly enough, I found out I was, I don't know if they call it shadow banned from YouTube because of those things I was placing. So it's kind of hard to find me on YouTube. But there's good information. So if you do find me or reach out, I'll be happy to send you something. But, you know, as a general rule, when you start looking at depression and anxiety, there are some very extreme cases that may need medication and hopefully for a short period of time and others longer. But natural strategies, and Dr. Daniel Amen has proven this now with 200,000 brain scans, are powerful to change the brain and get it back to good health and function.
Perfect. Next question. How can someone manage their emotions and prevent being triggered by or taking things personally?
With a lot of practice. And you know, I think we're all wired a little differently, and we certainly all have our hot buttons. But Stephen Covey wrote the most successful business book of the last century. It was called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he said there's a gap between stimulus and response. And if we take a deep breath, we can actually expand that gap. And Navy SEALs are actually taught this. I've read 7 books by Navy SEALs and 3 by an author named Jocko Willink, who literally led the SEAL team in Fallujah, Iraq, the bloodiest, most horrible battle site of the war on terror. And the SEALs are taught, and I use the acronym or the memory aid, BADE, BADE. Breathe, assess, decide, execute. And the first thing the SEALs are taught, take a deep breath. Even if they only have a millisecond to think about it, take a deep breath, assess your circumstances, decide, and then take action. And, you know, he speaks very, very frankly that simple strategy saved, probably tens of thousands of lives from not making a bad decision. And especially under those levels of circumstances, that can all work for all of us. But when we start talking about a very simple, deep breath, one thing that we know is it actually activates what's known as the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest, digest, and you can even throw in procreate, because that's parasympathetic as well. And you want to be in that calm state. And there's another Navy SEAL named Mark Devann. He wrote a book called The Unbeatable Mind. And when he was in extreme circumstances, he would always do something called box breathing. And he would breathe in to a count of 5, hold it for a count of 5, exhale for a count of 5, hold the exhale for a count of 5, and then start the process. So all sides were exactly equal. And he says, literally, he was in circumstances where he was being attacked underwater. His mask didn't work. He was running out of air. And just by having just a little bit of oxygen, he knew what he had in his tank. He was able to slow his breathing, do the box breathing, get out of the firefight, and survive and live to tell the story. And so if circumstances are that extreme and that mechanism works, imagine what you could do to train yourself under, most of the things that you and I deal with. Now, we all at some point in our life are going to have storms. And, I've had a day where I had some patients come in with horrific stories, even where a spouse was found to be plotting murder against a spouse. I mean, you can't even imagine the horrors that some people go through. And thank God it was found out. But everybody has something, breathe, assess, decide, take action, but increase that gap between stimulus and response. Do your best there. And over time, you'll get better. Practice, practice, practice. With practice comes better.
Perfect. We do have another question. What do you recommend for someone who has trouble going to bed earlier?
Well, again, that's going to be practice, So I'm a huge fan of what's known as an electronic sunset. And they know that some of the things that are most disruptive to our overall wellness is artificial lighting, especially blue hues, especially screens like this. So especially no screens within an hour of bed. But, in that book, Peak, they talk about the best of the best getting 8.6 hours a night. And we know that for the most part, it's better for early to bed, early to rise. But there are also studies about things called chronotypes, interestingly enough, where certain people are better off night owls, late to bed, late to rise. And by the way, chronotypes change over time. So teenagers tend to be night owls and geriatrics tend to be early to bed, early to rise. That doesn't speak well to me because I think I was a geriatric from age 12. I always loved to go to bed early and wake up early. And that time of day is really good for me. But there's a absolutely fantastic, amazing book entitled Why We Sleep. And it was recommended me over a year ago. And I thought, well, I know why we sleep. But this PhD researcher studied sleep across all these different animal species and cultures. And the reason we sleep and every animal species sleeps is because it's absolutely life critical. They used to think sharks didn't sleep because they don't have eyelids. They don't close their eyes, but their eyes are open and they keep swimming, but they sleep with 1/2 of their brain at a time. And by the way, they've said that humans have that capacity too. So they often say, if you're in a strange environment like a hotel room, maybe the first night you don't get good sleep because half your brain is alert, thinking, okay, this is new, this is novel, there's something going on here. And they want to be very, very careful about that. But ultimately, in this book, Why We Sleep, in his tips, the top tip is have a consistent routine and make it a priority. Same time to bed within reason every single night. Now, what could be out of reason? Well, maybe you travel, and, if you're going to go a number of time zones away, well, guess what? It's going to take your body time. And here's what they've now found. The body has a rhythm, and literally it takes about 1 day per hour time zone difference for your body rhythms to sync with the earth rhythms. And there is an earth rhythm. And so, in a perfect world, if you were going to go far away, you'd probably want to be there a while to, at least let your body catch up. I think one of the more challenging trips I took was to Australia for only 5 days. And I went there 5 days, came back, 15-hour time zone both ways. I felt upside down literally for a couple of weeks. It took me that long to recover. And that was with all the things I know, good body care, melatonin, acupuncture, things like that. So try to be consistent.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions? Did they want to raise their hand right now? Devann.
Hey, Dr. Bob. So I have a final question. And so thank you again for really diving deep on all the 8 pillars of health in terms of self-care, physical health, and the rest. So my question is, what can someone do, considering all these 8 pillars around healthy habits? What can someone do within the next 24 hours? What would you recommend someone do the next 24 hours to start thinking about and implementing like actionable steps towards their healthy habits?
Well, I love that question. And I love that you're such a deep thinker and a contributor to our planet. So I literally read a very deep book called Pascal and the Meaning of Life. And it was written by one of my favorite philosophers, a guy named Tom Morris, who I affectionately call PhD. And Pascal was a brainiac from way back when. And he says, people spend their time thinking about things that don't have much impact in terms of positive for the world or their life. He says, people need to spend more time on these deeper questions. What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of spirituality? Is there life after death? Where do we come from? All these deep things. These people don't think about that at all. So I would encourage people, get yourself in a quiet space. If you only have 15 minutes, take 15 minutes. If you have 30, take 30. If you can take an hour, take an hour. Get quiet and really think, what do I want to do with this beautiful gift of life that I was given? And understand, one of my mentors says that, there are many missions, but only a single purpose. And the purpose for all of us is this, according to this sage of wisdom: we're always to show up as our best self in service to something bigger than ourselves. And we have a world that really needs us now. And what does that look like to you? What is your best self? I look at Xaye and you, and I don't know, you seem as good as any two that I know at showing up as your best self. I mean, you're always polished and shiny and happy and bright and amazing. And I want to give you kudos for that. And for this, putting this together and sharing wisdom with the world. But take that time and figure out, who am I? Where do I want to go? And then how you get there ultimately is as they say at this point, not the issue. And when they would quote Martin Luther King with the most famous speech of all time, "I have a dream," what they say again and again was he had a dream. He didn't have a plan. He didn't say, "I have a plan, I have a dream." So what is that dream for your life? And how can you show up as your best, and as I like to say, getting better self in service to something bigger than all of us?
That's deep. That's deep. Oh, guys, have a dream before you have a plan.
Yeah, the dream comes first.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, what does optimal health look like to us? Because we have to see the picture before we can actually put the plan in place as well. Because we'll just do both. Just do both. Have to have the picture and the plan.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
So you look at some of these pillars, right? And Tom Brady has written about his protocol, and I think he's won 7 Super Bowls, right? I mean, this guy's obviously the greatest of all time, but he spends multi-millions every year on his personal health plan with a personal coach in terms of food and exercise and mental coach and then a chef. And getting all these metrics. Well, he has a little different means than most of us, but that's a good roadmap. I mean, ultimately, figure out what you want to accomplish and then surround yourself with the people that can do it. And I believe that in this era right now, there's infinite wisdom, near infinite wisdom, the touch of a button away. Now, ultimately, you got to be pretty cautious because there's a lot of bad information too. There's people, we could even say selling snake oil, but you probably want to connect with people that have a good track record. And thank you for the beautiful introduction, and have a good heart, because I think the heart trumps everything.
Most definitely, most definitely. Xaye?
And I do want to say, Dr. Bob, thank you so much. The way you wrapped up the 8 pillars, it's going to be a beautiful message, for people to listen to over and over and over again. I know some biggest takeaways that I received tonight. Does anyone else have any more questions?
I think Claudio has one.
I do, actually. That's why I'm just visiting with my grandson, and I figured, you know what, let me get on. The detox protocol that you have, will that work for everyone, Dr. Bob?
Well, Claudio, I'm going to give the best guarantee I ever got from any seminar, anytime, from any speaker. And this goes back a couple of decades ago. And this guy, I loved what he said. He said, I 100% guarantee you that 100% of what I tell you will not work for 100% of the people 100% of the time. And so there's going to be an exception in there somewhere, right? But is the principle of detoxification solid? Oh, it absolutely is. And so when I would teach seminars about detoxification, I can teach, multiple days on detox. It's that deep a topic. But people would say, well, how long do we need to detox? And I'd say, well, let's do an experiment. I'll set my watch right now, my stopwatch. Everybody stop detoxing now. Now, the basic element of detox is to exhale. And I tell people, most people in this room are going to be dead in 5 minutes, except for the pearl diver in Fiji, but that he can hold his breath for 18 minutes, but he's going to be gone in 20. So, realistically, detox is something that we're always doing. Breathe in, breathe out, And how about this? One man's food's another man's poison, or one organism's food. So that cyanobacteria breathing in that carbon dioxide, exhaling the oxygen to help us, we breathe in that oxygen, we exhale the carbon dioxide to help the plants. It's just such a beautiful ecosystem. But, there's probably always going to be exceptions, but, that is my clinical go-to. And I think it's been one of the most powerful interventions maybe that the world has ever seen in changing lives.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. So do you before we close, do you want to speak on the miracle products, the miracle herb that you was alluding to throughout this this presentation?
Yeah, and you know what? So it's called the Miraculous King of Herbs, also known as Ganoderma lucidum, reishi, lingqi, goes by those 3 different names. It's been in human clinical use for over 5,000 years. There's over 3,000 published medical studies. It's even shown to block replication of the HIV virus. There's a popular virus now where there's rock solid clinical data that it's good against that one too. It's proven against 15 different types of cancer, including some of the most horrendous, like glioblastoma, the most aggressive brain cancer, pancreatic cancer, stuff like that. And what I tell people is so magic is I've used this herb in clinical practice all 31 years. I was a very good student, and maybe even today, I'm a good student. I love information. I love studying. And one of my great mentors gave me a book entitled Reishi, King of Herbs. And he said, Dr. Bob, he says, this is the best thing I've ever found. If you really want to help people, figure out how to get this into people. So I would use, either capsules or very bad tasting tinctures, alcohol tinctures of this herb. And you know what? People, they take capsules when they were sick and they'd stop when they were better. They maybe choke down this tincture when they were feeling bad and stop when they were better. But the miracle of putting it in coffee and tea, I've introduced people to this over a decade ago. And for many, it's been life-changing in terms of turning around even serious chronic issues where they thought they were just going to have to suffer through for their entire life. Now, we live in this unique world where the only thing you can make a health claim on is a drug, so people can't name their conditions, but they can say, I was feeling really bad. I was 30 pounds overweight. My skin was yellow. My eyes were bloodshot. I had no energy. And I just switched to this coffee and tea and I started getting better, better, better. And you know what? I got my life back. And they're sharing this all over the world as we are. So I tell people, if you want to go to a good source, go to something called pubmed.gov, type in either Ganoderma or reishi or lingqi. Ganoderma is the most popular citation name, and any condition you want. And know this, it's probably been studied against it, but even if it hasn't, here's what we know. No known drug interaction, no known toxicity. We're operational in 40 different countries. None of our coffee and teas have any warning label on them at all. That means 40 different governments have said, hey, listen, we don't have to tell you to not worry about this medication, this health condition, this dosage, nothing. That's how safe it is. And the beautiful thing is, we're partnered in this. And, in a moment, I'll wrap up with 4 different questions that I like to ask, but I can't think and understand. I've studied nutrition, and taught nutrition for 31 years, probably studied it for 40 plus years. I can't think of a better, easier, more delicious, broad reaching way for people to get healthier. And by the way, there's also potential wealth component there. We don't tend to talk about it on Ask the Doctor. But the medicinal mushrooms are a $50 billion a year market. Ganoderma lucidum alone, $2.5 billion a year. And that's why people like us have said, you know what, it makes sense to partner with this company.
Most definitely, most definitely. So I mean, yeah, Xaye, do you want to leave any words before Dr. Bob finishes with his signature send off?
No, I guess, definitely let us know your biggest takeaway. Let us know in the Facebook group, reply to the email that you were receiving this on, and definitely let us know what your biggest takeaway was. And if you will have any more questions for Dr. Bob, this call is every Tuesday at 7 p.m. EST. And so you can always feel free to join if you have any more questions that come up later. But all in all, I just want to say again to you, Dr. Bob, thank you so much for, preparing the slides and to share all this information. You are full of so much wealth, and we always learn so much from you. And we just appreciate your insight and your wisdom and your generous heart to really come in your free time to come and just share this information of all your years of study and hard work. So thank you, Dee. And we would love to hear any last words that you have for this audience.
Well, I'm going to take that thank you right back to you consistently. And Carol, by the way, every week monitoring the Ask the Doctor so beautifully and from the heart every single time. And I think maybe that's what really defines this group. We're heart-centered. But I like to wrap up with 4 questions. And then they were taught to me by Jim Rohn. And here they are. The first question is why? Why'd you take the time to join us tonight? There's so many other things you could do. Second question is the answer to the first. Why not? Why not learn about strategies that absolutely can help you show up as your best self in service of something bigger than yourself? Next question is why not you? Someone's going to take that time, do a little soul searching, figure out what their best life looks like. And by the way, they'll realize that this phenomenal king of herbs, Ganoderma lucidum, especially delivered in coffee and tea, can be a fantastic way to really enhance all of the amazing pillars of health and a good life. And then the final question is, why not now? So the longer you wait to act on information, the least likely you are to act on it. So send away your primary takeaways, take the time to figure out where you want to go, reach back to whoever referred you to this Zoom or Facebook Live or replay or wherever you see it, and say, you know what, I'd like to know more. In fact, I'd like to try some of these amazing products. How do I get some? And with that, I'll wrap up with these words. I'm Dr. Bob Rakowski, absolutely knowing that we can all be happy, healthy, and successful. So good night all, and God bless.
Thank you, everyone.